Chapter 417. Nahan. Those who had entered by the power of Hosanna, hiding themselves around the mansion, flocked together all at once. I heard from Marson. There were cavalry members in the security management team. Did Duke Tane set a double trap to catch us? Cowardly bastards. It was a good thing that Nahan took only the minimum number of people. Marson was one of their comrades, with the ability to spit fires and cause explosions. He had been one of the most proactive in this affair along with Urshi. After the unexpected appearance of the cavalry, he tried to persuade the Urshi to flee with him until the very end but failed. His eyes were now filled with an even more intense hatred. Whether it's a double trap or a solo act by the cavalry, we can't be sure yet. What's clear is that as long as we are here, Urshi's will not be broken. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement with Nahan's words. That's right, indeed. Although we couldn't bring our brothers and sisters who were there, we are not thinking of giving up here. What about you, brothers? The Awakeners looked at each other's faces and swallowed hard. Then they all nodded with faces filled with determination. Nahan, we believe in the true paradise you have spoken of. So your will is our will, brother. There was no one here who would falter just because Urshi had not returned. They were the Awakeners who had lost their homes and suffered terribly, only to be carried into the perilous Great Serene Forest at the edge of the West. Nahan was the only one who had told them that they could express the anger, hatred, and sorrow that had been suppressed and built up throughout their lives. Nahan had led those who hadn't been able to properly use their abilities and triumphantly shattered various parts of Tenno, punctured the aristocrats' arrogance, and extracted information from their bellies. Despite his injured arm from the encounter with the cavalry not feeling healed, he had helped Urshi wholeheartedly without shrinking or retreating. A man possessing great and overwhelming power, moving solely for the Awakeners. While with him, the Awakeners felt a strong sense of belonging and liberation for the first time since birth. Although there were colleagues who didn't understand them, they knew that others would eventually come to realize that they were right. The truth that the Awakeners were not weak, that they must make sure who treated them like slaves, like monsters, pay the price, only then could be built a true paradise. But now our brothers at the auction house will be doing their best to crush the laughter of those who have been sucking our blood. We will be able to join them soon. Let's go. With hatred bordering on madness, they erased the last trace of fear and concern in their hearts, looked at each other's faces, and dispersed according to plan. A moment later, there were loud noises, flames, and explosions all around the garden. Listening to the chaos at the main gate, where most of the guards were concentrated, Nahan chuckled quietly. Isn't it funny, Hosanna? What do you mean? Even though we have come here once and killed one of them, most of the guards are still facing outward. Looking around the empty garden and laughing, Nahan's face turned grim. Sadly, it's all as expected. To them, that event must have become a non-issue. A non-issue. The particularly emphatic words made Hosanna's eyes drop with sorrow. He opened his mouth to say something several times, but instead changed the subject. But didn't you say most of the cavalry would be here? The cavalry commander and that black-haired cavalry member we saw before will also be here. I'm afraid, my lord, that you may run into them and get hurt again. This place, it's too dangerous. Hosanna worriedly looked over Nahan's arm. Though it was covered by clothing, his shoulder had not yet fully healed. Commander Kishir of the cavalry, who had been known in the world as nothing but a foolish and litigious man, had been marked as one of the most dreaded figures to Hosanna since that incident. Didn't I tell you to stop with those insolent thoughts, Hosanna? I'm sorry. Hosanna immediately averted his gaze from Nahan's arm. Nahan began to speak as he closed his overcoat. The cavalry, because of the last incident, has conflicted with the Duke of Tain with the information that a member of cavalry is imprisoned. Most of their brethren will probably be focused on their internal watch duty. It's a pitiful thing, and that's all they can do in a position akin to the emperor and nobles' dogs. The man's eyes, as he spat out the words, the noble's dogs, were at a glance utterly calm, yet they gave off an endless darkness. That's why I'm here after all. ... Silence fell, and another explosion sounded in the distance. The sounds of running feet were heard, and it seemed the slow knights had finally rushed in. Nahan placed his hand on Hosanna's shoulder and exerted his power. Knights who had come close to them passed by the two without suspicion. Despite having seen this astonishing spectacle several times, Hosanna still caught his breath each time. Let's go in. We must make the most of the opportunity our brothers have created. Avoiding others' eyes, Nahan slowly surveyed the area as they reached the main building. Some had already fought here, and several beautiful garden trees were broken and tumbling. Why haven't you prepared the carriage yet? Didn't I say we were leaving? It's dangerous now. Brave knights and cavalry members are outside, so after the situation calms down a little. Nahan, walking slowly behind them, looked coldly at a nobleman who was raising his voice at the servants inside the main gate. Just now, something. A nobleman, unable to control his anger, was beating a servant when he suddenly felt the presence of a stranger and turned his head. But Nahan was quicker, grabbing his head. Let go! Who dares to touch me? What is this? The young nobleman in splendid attire screamed as a terrible illusion penetrated his brain before he could finish his words. Even after Nahan released him, he clutched his head and screamed like a beast, eventually thrashing his forehead against the wall and floor like a madman. Moments later, something cracked in his overstrained head. Only after hearing the body fall limp did Hosanna, who had shut his eyes and turned away, open them again. But the problem was that a servant who had come to his senses after seeing the dead nobleman was still there. Monster! It's a monster! Please save me! Please! As Nahan exerted his power once more, the servant's eyes rolled back. Where is the younger brother of Baron Wilhelm, who was in charge of the Red Deer Consortium now? Lord Graham is on the third floor. After obtaining the information he sought, Nahan waved his hand, altering the illusion he had shown the servant. A moment later, the servant let out a strange noise and crawled on all fours like a beast. Having finished the task, Nahan reached out to Hosanna with a face as impassive as if nothing had happened. Hosanna bit his lip and once again followed behind him. A few unlucky ones encountered Nahan after that and became new victims. As they approached their destination, they heard chaotic explosions and the sounds of battle from various places. But wherever they passed was eerily quiet. Suddenly, Nahan stopped walking. His gaze was directed towards a man who stood alone at the entrance of the corridor where the third floor began. The man had dark red skin and thick hair, showing his southern descent, but he was wearing the light armor typical of the Ore Empire's knights. The man stood quietly and solemnly, holding his drawn sword. The moment he lifted his head and faced Nahan and Hosanna, a heavy premonition swept through the corridor, a power that only one who had reached the extreme of swordsmanship could emit. Even Hosanna, who knew nothing of what it meant to be a sword master, felt instinctively that their opponent was no ordinary knight and began to tremble. Lord Nahan. Hosanna tried to grab Nahan with trembling hands, but Nahan coldly shook his head at him. No matter how strong the knight might be, if he was not an awakener, he could not be a match for him. That was Nahan's firm conviction. So, you must be Nahan. The taciturn knight slowly opened his mouth and spoke. By my lord's command, no one may proceed beyond this point.